Hello, everyone. Welcome to the EGS meeting for the 28th. Today we have a special guest, Chris Totten. You may know him. He has come into some classes before. If you've ever had some of Tony's classes, you may know his book on architectural design for video games. And I also shared with you his recent Kickstarter, Little Nemo, and I always mess up the title of this. I'm sorry.
The Nightmare Fiends.
And the Nightmare Fiends. Yeah, I know it was Fiends. All right, Little Nemo and the Nightmare Fiends. And he's going to give us a talk, I believe, on the Kickstarter, what having Kickstarter is like, and I think a little bit about the game. So I'm just going to hand it off to him right now. If you have any questions, we most likely have a small Q&A at the end. And Chris is generally, I've heard in the past, you're generally open for quick emails or anything people have said. Is that true?
Oh yeah. I
don't want to send a million people at you.
No. It's the crunchy end of the semester, so like maybe give me a day or two before
Absolutely.
being like, hey, did you see my email? But yeah. So yes, I do like to there are people out there in the game industry who don't like to give students time, and they suck. And I don't want to be one of those people. So like, I try to do what I can.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So I'm gonna confess something here. I don't have like a talk done because aforementioned crunchy end of the semester. However, I mean, I can say a few general things and then really kind of do like a sort of Q&A discussion roundtable-y thing with this. So, hi, I'm Chris Totten. The intro really did a good job, so I'm going to not do my usual "here's who I am" spiel, but. So I've had 2 Kickstarters in the past. I've technically had 3, but I've had 2 that are worth talking about. So the first one was La Mancha, which was actually, again, my second Kickstarter. So the first one was for a game called Dead Man's Trail that we were trying to get some funding for, and it didn't end up working out. For a number of reasons that will probably be brought up in the discussion of the other 2. So the first one that was successful was this game called La Mancha, which actually I have a copy of right here. Oh. So La Mancha, it's a tabletop game based on the book Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. And that was kickstarted in 2018. So it was a much more modest Kickstarter than my one for Little Nemo, but board game Kickstarters tend to be. I was really just trying to get funding to do a print run of that. But in doing so, I learned a lot of really important lessons about community outreach, how much I learned a lot about who is going to help you signal boost your Kickstarter. Now board games and tabletop games, I mean, I should say the tabletop scene is very different from video games. I also learned a lot about the tabletop game scene as opposed to like indie video games, so indie tabletop versus indie video games, and I can even talk about that a little bit if people want. But this was an exercise in learning like logistics, sales tax, all that other fun stuff that like I'm sure as game design students none of you have ever thought about, but it's like most of my time. That I always tell my students, I'm like, you think that learning Maya is the most important thing. However, let me tell you what haunts my dreams now. And speaking of dreams, then there's also, again, Little Nemo and the Nightmare Fiends, which is my most recent Kickstarter project, my current game project that I was, even working on like as the meeting was started. But, that is a 2D, it's a video game. It's a 2D non-linear platformer. I hesitate to call it a full Metroidvania because our plan is not to have all the sectors, like all the different biomes, like connected. They're going to be, you'll access them through like a menu or a world map, and there's going to be like a hub. But beyond that, it's got four playable characters, hand-drawn graphics. It's based on a comic from 1905 by animation and comics pioneer Winsor McKay, who did a bunch of stuff that made what we are here talking about possible. And his work is in the public domain. So we were like, let's go for it. Let's make a hand-drawn video game as an honor to him, but also maybe fix some of the icky parts that didn't age well from 1905. Yeah, knowing head shaking from Tony. And in terms of that, some of the big revelations of that beyond, some of the things that we've, like, because you're always learning. It's interesting to navigate so like these gamers have access to us, right? Like, and they don't normally have access to game developers. So that's been, I think, even more so than La Mancha, a huge, there's like a little bit of this in that game, but this game really, really is a crash course in, we're getting asked questions about like, what are the directions for downloading, things in the, like, features of the game that we're not even thinking about building yet, because we've finished a prototype of our game and are now in the process of like taking our game completely apart so that we can make like the nice version of the the gameplay. And people are like, yeah, so you're gonna do DRM? And we're like, we don't know. Ask our publisher when we get one. So that's, we have things like that, things like, working with community management has been really interesting. I don't know. I mean, I guess like, let's talk about your questions about this, because like, like I said, I think one of the biggest things, when I talk to my students about this, it's almost like they don't always know what to ask. And I try not to, I'm really glad the Kickstarter is over, both for quality of life reasons. I mean, I can even just answer questions on what it's like having a Kickstarter, hell. But, yeah, like, because I've tried to, I'm glad the Kickstarter is over because I can talk about it more. When I would talk about it in class, with my students, I would try not to talk about it too much, because I don't want to, it feels icky to promote, like to come across as anything that might look like promoting. Now there's no promotion, so you can ask me everything. So
I think the first thing I want to say about you promoting the game was it was a fantastic display every time I would go on Twitter while you were promoting. Always hitting up the hashtags, always adding people. I think you were looking for follows and you needed the 250th follow, and I just happened to be that. And so you immediately like quote tweeted me and you were like, yeah, we got it. And I was getting all these likes and I was like, oh shit, okay, wow. And you were really getting people excited.
So okay, this brings up a really interesting part of social media managing your own games, which is, and this came up on our team a lot, which was how much is too much? And the actual answer is it's never too much. You're actually probably never doing enough. We had like one backer complain, and once we explained like, hey, look, we're doing our own marketing, here's why, then they kind of eased off and we're like, okay, that makes sense. But so it's interesting with Kickstarter, like we had a lot of people asking like, hey, why haven't you gone viral and just like hit 400% yet? I'd be like, so let me tell you about that. That is when they have a marketing, they have money, maybe they already have a publisher, they have a marketing firm they're working for. The marketing firm has money that they use to like juice the Kickstarter on a slow day or something. So there's like levels of things going on in the background that you're not necessarily privy to, which then creates hype, which then, you know, you get the funded in 24 hours. So like true virality, like viralness is a different thing. Viralness is really not that common. What you see more is that you do get like what we had, where it was kind of you get like a big first day or two, and then you kind of like, you're not in the you know, just launched thing anymore. And then you just kind of like crawl a little bit, and you might have a good day or two here and there. But you know, you want to have like nice consistent pacing. You know, you don't want to lose money for sure. But yeah, that is one of the things, you know, what you brought up with like always being on social media. That's why it was actually really rough, is because it was like, I had to be on social media as soon as I got up, anytime that I was not teaching a class, anytime that I didn't even get that much time to make the game. When you're doing a Kickstarter, you don't get to make your game. Your Kickstarter is, and it is like progress on your game because you're fundraising for it, but it also like you want to, I mean, for me, because I'm doing, you know, I did art on La Mancha. I mean, I did everything on La Mancha, but it was like I was in the illustration phase when the Kickstarter was up. Here, I'm doing a lot of the animation. So it's like, I just want to draw, okay? But now I need to be like answering emails and doing all this other stuff. And so yeah, social media is a huge part of it. And yeah, like I'm asked a lot, like how much is too much? And it actually is never enough. Because I had a few people be like, man, you're having to be on a lot. And then I had marketing people be like, why don't you talk about this more? And I'm like, it's like, it's literally everything I say. I give myself maybe an hour to be a human.
Did you ever take down the data of like impressions or anything like that to find like the best time to talk about the game? I know a lot of people say if you aren't posting at 9 a.m. or 1 p.m. on Twitter, there's no point of even posting anything.
Yeah. In terms of timing, no. Also, 9 a.m. happened to be when I was dropping my kids off at school. So there's that, you know, that to work around. But generally, yeah, between 11 and 1 was a really strong time for us, because that is when people are like on social media and things like that. And in terms of analytics, what you can do when you have a Kickstarter is you can actually set up special links. Now, I mean, we did most of it through www.littlenemogame.com, which even now still auto forwards you to the Kickstarter, but we set that up mainly so that we'd have a quick way, like a efficient way to type in the game URL, the Kickstarter URL, so that you could essentially like save on characters on Twitter. Because like on one hand, on Kickstarter, you can actually set up custom links so that you can use that for your analytics. So you can be like, one thing that we had was Twitter art, Twitter retro, Twitter, what was the third one? There was a third one. But basically what these were we had a few different angles from which we were promoting the game. One of them was we are recreating the art of Winsor McCay. Oh, one of them was, I think it was like McCay or comics or something. One of them was like, we have hand-drawn artwork and here's what our style is about. Similar to the Winsor McCay one. And then one of them was like, hey, did you like Little Nemo the Dream Master on NES? Well, guess what? 36-year-olds. I'm 36, so like that's very much in my wheelhouse. But you know, that's that. We could see how many hits those. I mean, you can anyway, because you can also look at your Twitter analytics, but from a Kickstarter perspective, you can see who's actually clicking on your link. The trouble with those is that you do have like a longer link, but you know, we were able to actually look at some of those, and we, surprisingly enough, it was the art angle that hit the most. We thought we'd be promoting based on Capcom's game, but that did okay. That got us somewhere a little bit, but it was talking about the art style and talking about the history that really did it.
I'd like to mention that in addition to digital games, we've also had a few teams who've created analog games, a board game and a card game. There's a board game currently in the works. So some of your advice on getting production quotes and figuring out the logistics you were talking about with getting La Mancha over here actually would be appropriate to some of our teams.
So that's great. I can do something with this knowledge. So I chose, and I say this distinctly because like I have some friends over at RIT, Owen and Ian, who kickstarted a game, and then, no, did they kickstart? I don't even think they kickstarted their game, but what they chose to do was do it through Game Crafter, and so everything was print on demand. So when you're doing a tabletop game, you have a choice. You can do print on demand, or you can do like you get a printer to do. And I went with Panda Game Manufacturing. They're a little more expensive, but I really like their work. The quality of the things they make is just so nice, and I really wanted that. And like, you know, because I'm mainly a digital game developer, I was like, well, if I'm going to do this like maybe once, I really want to like go all out. So let's go with Panda. So I chose to do it with a printer. And what you do is, if you were to do something like a Kickstarter, what you'd want to do is you'd want to maybe like get a few quotes from a few production companies. And so you really need to know like what your game is. You can't go online. You can't go on and be like, oh yeah, we got this idea for a board game. You know, you really want to say, I've made this game. It has this many cards, not in your Kickstarter speech, but like, you know, you want to know what everything in that box is and how big the box is, so that you can go to them, fill out their interface, and then that will actually enable them to give you a quote. That quote will become, of the company you chose, will become part of your Kickstarter budget. In addition to, you know, rewards, you want to make sure you double and triple check what, you know, shipping rates are internationally and nationally, all that other stuff. And you want to, you know, get like, you want to have a tote bag. How many tote bags are you thinking you might order? You know, do an order. How much does that cost? T-shirts, postcards, art prints, whatever you want to do is physical. So you get all that information, you come up with a budget, and then that becomes your Kickstarter like amount. That becomes the amount you ask for. And then, so in terms of like, let's say you make it, right? What happens is with the printer, you are now press them on what like importing fees and taxes are going to be, because you need that information as well. Our printer was a little wishy-washy on that in like a weird way. I mean, obviously it all worked out, but I had to like put in a little money for the printing costs, or for the some of the importing stuff. And so it was make sure you get that information. But basically what would happen is that you go full steam ahead, you pay whatever like introductory fee happens. You'll send them the assets when you're ready. They will send you a first test copy. You approve it, or wait, they'll do the proofs, then they'll do the test copy. Once the test copy is done, then they'll send it to manufacturing. The company I went with had a shipper that they were associated with, so I did not have to go find a shipping company in China myself, which was nice. It's a little more expensive that way, but like it's worth it. And then I don't know, you watch remember that, what was that website? Vessel Finder. Remember how everybody was on Vessel Finder when that week that the boat was like stuck in the Suez Canal, and they were all like looking at the boat being in the Suez Canal? Well, I got to watch Vessel Finder before it was cool, because I was like, where's my boat today? And because they'll tell you like what boat your thing is on. So then it ships to you, and then you do you stuff boxes. You can also get a logistics company. There are logistics companies that will work with you to do that stuff for you, but then that's an additional cost, and that like you usually pay rent for storage space and things like that. I have a basement, so I did it myself. Which was, lots of mornings of getting up at like 5:30 and stuffing boxes. So,
Hey, Chris, I was wondering, we could, if you don't mind, switching gear a little bit, and let's go into sort of game design aspect of it, and talking about your sort of new game, Little Nemo. What was your, that is, how did the idea of the game came about, and how similar and different is it to like past game? You mentioned like the NES version of the game and so on, and sort of the details that goes into trying to take a game that is on the printed page, a comic, into some sort of interactive game, and what that process and thought process is like.
So first of all, hi Frank. Yeah, so the game came about. So when I was a kid, I rented and played Little Nemo the Dream Master for NES. I liked it. It's pretty good. I have a copy today. It's and I remember like before I went back and bought it, right? I was looking it up. I was like, oh, what was that game that I thought was really cool? Oh yeah, Little Nemo. Let me look that up. This is like years and years later. And when I looked up Little Nemo, I found the comics. And like my background's in architecture, so when you see those comics and I don't know who all in the room has looked at the comic. Go look at the comics. The draftsmanship in these comics is beyond belief. The architectural rendering, everything is just mind blowing. So I became like a huge fan of the comics, and the book that I held up when Tony and I were like comparing Little Nemo print editions is actually a Christmas gift my wife got me in like 2013. So I've been a fan for like a long time. And, at one point I was just like, oh, it's in the public domain. Cool. Somebody should make a video game about that. Man, it'd be cool to make a video game about that. I should make a video game about that, So, it's one of those things where like years ago I made a design document and was like, that scope is huge. I'll never make it. And then I was at GDC hanging out with some people, and we were talking about like projects we'd love to do. And I mentioned, oh yeah, I got this design document I wrote years ago. And a friend of my friend Ben was like, let's do it. I'm like, okay. So, you know, and the goals were explicitly, so like one of my big pieces of research, because I am a, you know, tenure line faculty at a university, is, you know, finding these crossover places between games and the arts. And I have made games based on, you know, you saw the Don Quixote game. I have a game that's based on a work of a Russian constructivist artist from the 1920s called Elizitsky. So I have like a game based on one of his posters, or a few of his posters that I did
I
years
love
ago.
that one, by the way.
What?
I love that one, by the way.
You know,
I wrote
that
a little
game...
bit about it, and I should send you my writing about it.
Oh, really? Yeah, that game has had an interesting little life. For a thing I made in 3 months, for like years ago. You know, it missed being displayed next to the poster by 2 weeks at Art Institute Chicago. The Bit Bash people were like, "Hey, we saw your game. Can we show it?" I'm like, "Sure." And they emailed me. They were like, "We missed the original poster by 2 weeks. We're so sorry." I was like, "What? That's insane." Not mad at them. I'm not going what at them. I'm going like, what? That's amazing. So I get a cool story out of that. But yeah, no, it's a surprising number of people have seen that game. Anyway, back to Nemo. So this is something that I'm kind of interested in, is like experimenting with art styles. Like, you know, I was doing like cutout games with like paper and foam cutouts like years and years ago, just to try something different when I was super tired of doing 3D one day. So I'm really interested in this idea of like playing around with art styles in games. And so and if you look at a Nemo comic, it's a side scroller. He never did close-ups. He never did changing camera angles. That language wasn't there yet. So everything was like the equivalent of a side scroller video game. And I was like, oh my gosh, this could just be a video game. So, you know, we studied, I have tons of books about Winsor McCay and Little Nemo, analytical, you know, everything from just the straight up comic to McCay's biography by John Canamaker to, you know, academic writing about Little Nemo and the history of comics and the graphics and the historical context and things like that. So I really dove into those materials, learned everything I could, synthesized it into an art style. So the art style is almost like an academic work in a way. And then, you know, it became an asset list, and now we're plugging along in the actual game development of it. So, you know, it kind of drives the way that we conceive of how the world looks. You know, and it became sort of a guiding principle for us. So it was like, well, what kind of powers would Flip have? What kind of powers would the princess have? What could, you know, Nemo maybe do, based on some of the things we see them do in the comic? You know, we're working with a narrative designer right now, Heidi McDonald, and she is helping, you know, there's a lot of back and forth of like, one of the big things that we've been exploring, for example, is like McCay, this is all like pre-style sheet, pre-production Bible, right? So he would just like drop kind of a narrative bomb on you and then never revisit it because that's like last week's comic. So, you know, we're finding all of these bits and pieces from the comic and we're like, what if we fleshed that out? Like one of the characters, Flip, he's the son of the sun, you know, and they mention it like once or twice. It becomes kind of a bit for a while because anytime he gets offended, he goes and talks to his uncle, the Dawn. And he's like, hey, they were mean. Go do the thing. And then his uncle rides through and then the sun rises and then like everybody gets kind of burnt up. But then they return next week because Nemo goes back to sleep. And like they use it as a bit for a while, but it's never really like expanded upon. So we're like, let's do that. Let's actually make something out of that. But yeah, that's kind of how it began, was like, let's explore this art style. Then let's you know, think of what the game could be. In terms of the mechanics, there was a temptation to go with the NES game, but also Capcom owns the NES game. And like Nemo never wears the skin of a frog, pal. It's a little Hannibal. It's a little Buffalo Bill. You know, but he never like, he rides animals in the comic, but it's never like, it's not the core of it. So we wanted to look at like, what are they doing in the comic? And really it's a game where you just, or it's a comic where he just like, the comic is about seeing fantastical sights. And if you remember, or if you put yourself in 1910, did they have mass media? No. Did they have films readily accessible? Starting to, maybe. They didn't have television. They, you know, what did they have? They had newspapers, and the newspaper comics were, you know, newspaper comics, circuses, posters, graphic prints. You know, you could just take a photo and then release that photo as a card that people could buy and then display. So the comic had an element of that, and we're really trying to embrace it. So we're like, well, what is that? That's a game where maybe it's a lot of like moving around environments and finding these nice moments, which then again kind of took on some Metroidvania aspects. And so that's where some of the mechanics came from, was using that as our guiding principle. And then same thing with like, we were really interested in not just having the protagonist be Nemo, both from the standpoint of there's all these other characters, what do we do with them? But then also from the standpoint of, well, if we have more characters than Nemo, we can maybe diversify our cast more and then have more representation. So we also used a game called Little Samson as a launching off point for like,
I love Little Samson.
Yeah, it's a great game where, you know, like you have 4 characters in your party and then you can switch between them. But it's also the same thing you see in like Shantae, where, you know, she has her different animal forms, or Wonder Boy, where Wonder Boy 3, where you can turn into the different animals. So we also started embracing those, and then that's where the Metroidvania came from. It was like kind of sights and sounds of Slumberland, but also these other games that we became very interested in. Oh, and Demon's Crest on Super Nintendo, which is a lovely game.
Will you do, are you going to do the Little Samson rotating models, do you think? That's a little direct, I know, but I'm a huge fan of it.
That's not direct. You know, it amazes me, like, it is amazing when you're an artist what you can get away with as direct and indirect, because we are doing callbacks to the animals from the NES game. The frog, the big giant frog in our trailer is one such callback, and then I released a picture of the salamander during the Kickstarter campaign. But you know, it's one of those things where it's like, it hews close enough that if somebody's looking, they'll be like, oh yeah, but it, you know, it's pretty far away, so it's not one-to-one. So, you know, Capcom's not going to come knocking on our door. Even then, I don't think that they've protected those particular characters, but we don't have any blue robots in our game.
And just sort of following up on my question, what would you want people who know and love the comic to come away from playing your game, and for people who have never seen the comic to come away from playing your game?
So if you've seen the comic, we hope people appreciate the celebration of the thing that we've put in, and the painstaking effort. Like there's a creature in one comic in one panel, and there's a few of these, but like, you know, there's a creature in one comic in one panel that we were like, oh, that'd be a really cool enemy that maybe like crawls on the walls or something like that. But we hope people come away with seeing maybe their favorite scenes, their favorite moments, or even just like kind of the meta elements of what they appreciate about Winsor McKay, his influence, his work, his art style, represented and celebrated in a way that, like, because if you know who he is, like, I mean, he influenced everything we have now, but he's not a household name. Like you know, a random animation fan is not going to know who Winsor McKay is. They'll know who Walt Disney is. They will not know that Walt Disney was a huge Winsor McKay fanboy that went so far as to produce a segment in one of his shows in the 50s, his TV show in the 50s, that recreated a performance of Gertie the dinosaur. You know, so we hope people will appreciate, who know about Winsor McKay will appreciate the celebration of those comics, you know, because you know, we are doing that painstaking work, and for us, it is a work of, like, historic preservation in a way. Like, we're not doing actual historic preservation work. You know, the Billy Ireland Museum is doing that. But what we are doing is we are taking something and bringing it into the foreground so people can consume it and understand it. But also, you know, we have the in-game museum and other things. So we are doing a callback to say, and it is based on these comics. If you've never seen it before, we want to introduce this world to you. We want to introduce this creator to you, and to contextualize this work in its place in animation history and media history. You know, and maybe draw connections with the things you have today and the work that's come before. It's amazing when you look at these comics that they're kind of like game levels. Each one has a theme, a central idea, a biome. You know, it's really, like, neat storytelling. And I don't mean neat in terms of, like, the narrative is amazing. The narrative is actually not amazing at all. But it's so clear. You know, today we are in the mushroom forest, and the panel layout expresses this idea. You know, the panel layout is this, and the panel layout is used to show the tall mushrooms collapsing on Nemo when he accidentally touches one the way he was told not to, and then he wakes up from the dream, you know. But everything in it, it's like meaningful play, you know, like, you know, to borrow Salen and Zimmerman's term, like, everything fits together, and it is like level design. It's like a video game in that way. It's really remarkable. But, you know, some people know it, some people don't. So we're excited. One of the most fun things, and I realize now it's becoming like a long rambling answer, like Mather's ones did. But we had a ton of people come to us because they did know the NES game, and then we'd get a message from them saying, like, wow, you introduced me to this comic. Like, this is amazing. So that's been really cool.
I was wondering if there were any drawbacks or surprises from having an existing fan base and pulling from that, like, expectations from the fans, not only of Nemo, but even possibly of La Mancha.
I'm glad you did La Mancha too. So with La Mancha, it was weird because, and I get this, like, there was not enough money in the budget to do a Spanish translation, and I want to do a Spanish translation someday. And we got some people that were like, well, how dare you? I'm like, do you know how much translators cost? And it's something I do still want to do someday. It's not in the cards right now. So there was that. The other thing so it hit me after the La Mancha Kickstarter made it, where I was like, holy crap, whole human beings have devoted their whole careers to studying this book, this one book. And here I am, like, I'm gonna make a board game out of it, you know, like a card game out of it. So I felt like this immense sense of pressure. And you know, La Mancha in particular is a game that is supposed to be like, well, if you don't want to read, oh, I have it up. If you don't want to read this, right? Like Don Quixote is that. And this is even like a smaller edition. I have the this edition from the 40s that is like 2 books that thick together. If you don't want to read that, you can play La Mancha and you can see scenes from the book and get a better sense of, oh, wasn't that the windmill guy? Which is like in chapter 8. It's like right away. You know, everybody knows that scene from right away. So in that sense, it was like, same thing with you know, like Liziski's Revenge was a game that I was teaching a class on, and I'm going back to this for a reason. I was teaching a class on graphic design history, and I thought that the artwork and how the juxtaposition of visual elements was an important part of this language. That I was like, well, what if you made a game where, like, yes, it's an arcade game and it's really cool, but by like you are juxtaposing the elements, and then what happens when you do that, and if you take a screenshot at any time in the game, does it then become a new piece of constructivist artwork? So it was like the game was based on the, oh, there's a chat and I'm missing it. It was based on this idea of like, let's take the language of constructivist art and then make it something that you play, and then that playfulness becomes, you know, maybe new art. So La Mancha was like, let's take that same spirit and let's read some papers about Don Quixote. I even like, so Yale has open access classes on different topics, and one of them that you can listen to and watch is Cervantes' Don Quixote. I listened to the entire class like a podcast and was like starting to put like themes of it in my game. In the design of individual cards, just to give myself some grounding somewhere, instead of just like, you know, missing the point of something. I wanted to like double check everything. So it almost becomes like I have to, realizing the scope of this, I want to get it right. And there's a different, I mean, there's an interpretation that you could also say, well, why not just completely redo it? In a way, that's what my players in La Mancha are doing. They are reconstructing the story. They are telling new stories. I'm giving them the ingredients from the original book to do so. With Little Nemo, you don't quite have that agency because it's a video game, but you know, we are still striving to like, let's get these elements right. Let's do what, you know, we can to honor this work. You mentioned though, are we dealing with fans of this? I think the fans of the NES game were the more aggressive ones, but that's because they had never really, they didn't know what the comic was. And once we showed them the comic and explained this, it was kind of on them. And this sounds callous, but like, you kind of have to do this, everybody, students. You kind of have to do this sometimes, where you say like, our game is about this comic. Yes, there was an NES game. Yes, we like the NES game. We can't do the NES game. That's Capcom's to do. So when somebody would come to us and say, hey, his hair used to be purple. It looked better purple. Well, we can't do purple because we're basing it on this comic where his hair is brown. His hair is actually brown. Oh. Well, I like purple. Oh, too bad. Or
did you get any reaction to that for your work on Lizitzky's Revenge? Perhaps with people saying you're taking the original poster out of context or anything like that? It's a bit of a jump, but
no, it's not. I didn't. But I had to be ready. So I learned this in architecture school. When you do a design, because like we had to be critiqued every project, every week, critique. If you know your stuff and you have a reason for everything, they can disagree with you, but they can't say you did a bad job. And maybe that is their opinion, but you know what? The people who are also like, the people who know their stuff will at least acknowledge like, okay, they have a reason. This is kind of locked down. Because like when my thesis in grad school was on game design and architecture. It was finding the intersections between games and architecture. This should sound familiar. And like the people at the people they brought in for the thesis presentations were like angry. They were like mad. They did not want this to be, but I had answers for all their questions and they all gave me a commend. You know, because like in thesis, it was, you know, pass, fail, commend. So I got a commend. And so that's all. So, you know, it's that kind of like, and it's because I made my case. So you kind of have to make your case. And with Nemo, I was able to make my case. Some people might still, some people might not get it, but you know, that's again, like the people that aren't going to get it, they're just not going to be your consumers. So you have to almost like, how much is it worth your time to work with that? We did get, like I said, we got that. We got people that are, yeah, but the essence of Little Nemo is really being inside a frog. It's explicitly not, and I'm sorry. You know, and I always think back to this one narrative designer who used to work at Telltale, and on Twitter, she's since quit Twitter, which is a huge blow to gaming Twitter, but also I understand that like she got a lot of abuse on there. She was like, I promise you, I know everything about Batman, because like as a narrative designer, she had to know everything about on the Batman Telltale game. She had to know everything she could about that. So, you know, people would tell her, you don't understand Batman. She's like, I kind of do. And that happened with us a few times. The only places it ever really got weird was times when, so like if you read the comic, it's made by a white guy in 1905. There are racial caricatures that are not okay. There are lots of things that are not okay. We address all of those things by either tweaking characters' designs, Flip, so that he's not like a Irish caricature as much anymore, while not looking dissimilar to his, you know, we didn't make him 9-foot-tall Jason Momoa like Netflix is doing with their Slumberland movie with horns. He also has horns, I guess. But, you know, so we have like classic Flip look, but we took away the caricature elements. And then just like the characters for, you know, African-American characters they're gone. We went to a BIPOC artist and said, we want to have this fourth member of a team. We want it to be something, you know, we want the character to be somebody that could provide representation. Can you help us build a character? And she did a phenomenal job creating Peony. But I did get a Facebook message that was like, so is Impy like not PC enough? Like, is Impy going to be in the game? I'm like, hell
no. I don't think there's any chance. I think people can look that up on their own.
Well, and you know what? Impy is like, I feel so bad for him. Like, I have so much empathy for that character. You can never use him, but man, I just root for him so hard, you know, in the comic.
I'm wondering, because you talked a lot about communicating the vision to the audience and the people consuming, but correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned La Mancha was like just you working on it and Little Nemo was like a whole team.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? So what was it like with La Mancha? You could just do all of the research with Yale on your own, kind of just, you have it all in your brain. And then with working on a team, you have to then communicate that with a team and make sure you all have the same vision.
Yeah, so our core team is 3 people. The people who are keeping, so me and Adrian are the ones who are doing like all the hardcore reading on Nemo. Ben is coming at it from basically like, the quick answer is that you need to let people come in with whatever parts of the vision they're going to come in with, and you've got to like say like, okay, here's what I think of when I think this, and you find ways to bring that together. So like, for example, the frog in the trailer, you know, the idea of the frog is that we're like, all right, I was like, I don't know if I want to touch anything in the NES game. And now I'm like, yeah, let's do it. But at the beginning, I was like really hesitant. You know, and we didn't want to ever do like animal suits or anything. But you know, Adrian and Ben were like, I want to feed candy to a frog. I'm like, okay, we're feeding candy to a frog. So let's make it work. So it's like, all right, what is it about the candy? Well, maybe we're in the dream of a 7-year-old. Maybe candy is currency. And so like the shop takes candy and the frog takes candy. And like when you feed candy to the frog, he like maybe gives you an upgrade or something. You know, so we started spitballing ideas and figuring out like, how are we going to make this fit? And it did start to become a, like, can we make a thing that touches on everybody's memories of Nemo? Because there's also that movie from like 1989 that you can actually watch for free on YouTube. It's okay. It's an okay movie, but you know, like people have strong memories from that. And actually Ben came in and was like, well, we should have a flying bed. We didn't hit that stretch goal, but you know, when we are doing our pitches to publishers, it's in the pitch. And the reason for that is that you do start to say, you want to bring everybody's mindsets in. You don't want to like kind of come down hard and say like, all right, this is all it can be. Now, for us, there's practical reasons to say like lean on the comic extra hard. But in that way, there is this back and forth where you do start to kind of say like, hey, I'm trying to solve this problem. You know, do you have any ideas? Oh, actually, from this comic, there, you know, there's this thing, and we can do that. And you know, so you start to like kick it around, and it just sort of, you almost establish like what parts are important to everybody, and then kind of go back to those. So that's how we've managed it so far.
I guess in the last couple of minutes, I'll ask one more question, which is I guess it's sort of like a fairly abstract question. Do you feel, what do you think, or if anything, gets you gain going from printed comic to video game? And what do you think gets potentially lost going from printed comic to a video game? In 3 minutes.
I think the thing that is gained is that so the thing that's lost is like, we've really tried to think of like, is there a way that we could do the one-to-one panel layout experimentation? And apart from turning our game into Comic Zone, which I think that the trademark that Sega had on the Comic Zone technology is, I think that actually expired, so you could technically do it. But it wasn't the game that we wanted to make. We don't want to make Little Nemo Comic Zone. We wanted, but you kind of lose that. Our answer to it is like, if there's a place where we can maybe like situate a character in a screenshot the way it would be in the comic, we'll take that into account in the level design. So like if you look at our screenshot of the moon, he's like dead center. And one of my students asked, like, well, why do you have the moon always in that position? And why don't you kind of like go outside the circle when you're doing your animations? Because like all the animations take place within the confines of the circle instead of breaking out, like, you know, a cheek or an eyelid or something, or the nose breaking outside of the boundaries of the circle. And I'm like, because we're actually trying to recreate the layout from the comic that had the moon, and it's a circle. Like, well, it's not technically a circle, but like it's neater if it is a circle. So we're trying to put that in, but we lose it, right? We can't do that playfulness of the format that you could with McKay. The thing you gain is, I gotta say, it's been a fantastic journey animating some of these characters, because it's like, you look at Bosco the dragon, who is essentially a trolley, right? He's a dragon that has a throne in his mouth, and then Nemo and the princess can like get on the throne, and then the dragon like takes them around Slumberland on a tour. And you start to look at this creature and you're like, who is this creature? Because now I need to like make this creature move. And so what does this creature do? And then he has a driver, and like, what's the relationship there? And is this driver, like, is this his pet that he loves? Is this like this driver's, we finally settled on like, the driver has a lot of like, I'm 3 years from my pension and I just don't care anymore energy. So he's kind of tired of the dragon's BS. And the dragon is a puppy, a golden retriever puppy, basically, we've decided. So that's been kind of the fun part, is like doing that kind of work, of deciding like who all these creatures are and what they do. Because yeah, like sometimes you're just faced with this, like nobody's animated Dr. Pill before. Like everybody, he's appeared in comic reboots, he's appeared in, or like comic things that honor the comic, things that, you know, all this static media, illustrative media. How does he move? You know, and we've decided he's a snake oil salesman, you know, kind of like putting a little pizzazz on everything. So I think that's been really fun. And again, to your talking about the academic angle of it, because, you know, again, my department is animation and game design. So we get to play what if, you know, and for my own selfish desires, I get to play what if with like the backgrounds too, where I'm like, well, what if McKay knew about, like, he's clearly pulling from the 1893 World's Fair. It's like, but what if he knew about Antonio Gaudi, who was doing his thing over in Spain around the same time? What if he knew about him? So let's put Gaudi in the background. Let's put, you know, Sagrada Familia in the background. With the animation, it's like, what if McKay had smear frames? What if he had Disney's 12 Principles of Animation? So we get to play that with the things we gain, which has been super fun. So, yeah. And
those of you who don't know, the Adrian you mentioned is actually Adrian Sandoval, who's done a few classes with us, and some of you may know, may have worked with. And yeah, so go read Little Nemo. Like, normally you should have something printed at least this big in order to read it. This is actually kind of small, as we were talking about, but this was back when days when comic strips were printed with huge panels, big stories, and this golden age of illustration that McKay came out of really allowed his work, which you can't see it all on my webcam, to be portrayed like it is meant to in a big size. And yeah, it was the mass media of its day.
So you can go to this website called Comic Strip Library. And if you go to browse comics there, you can search for, well, I'll just provide a link directly to Little Nemo. But they have a bunch of other comics. So like one of the things that has been fun is like, we're not even just putting Little Nemo in there. We're putting references to some of McKay's other, I just dropped it into chat. So Comic Strip Library has most of Nemo, minus like some of the stuff in the 20s, but that's it's okay. His best stuff is like maybe from the first 5 years of the comic when he was at the New York Herald. He also has some other comics. One is called Dream of the Rarebit Fiend, which is like Nemo, but for grown-ups. So if Nemo is like an adventure story for kids, Rarebit Fiend is a horror comic for grown-ups. It's like, what if this, but scary. And there are some Nemos that I swear he got the scripts mixed up. Because there's a Nemo or two where it's like, this is awful. This is horrifying. So we're actually bringing some of that into the game, because, you know, in like the enemy design and some monsters and things I also can't talk about yet. But yeah, we're kind of doing like a McKay super mix. But yeah, if you go read that on Comic Strip Library, you can see a few of them. It does, like, it has some loose story arcs, but they're not like, the storytelling has not progressed to the way we would think of a serialized comic today. There's a lot of, I was kind of going through, so the Billy Ireland Museum at Ohio State has a really excellent Winsor McKay collection. And that includes scans of original pieces. So that link that I put is like what you get if you search Winsor McKay. Again, like as with anything, you know, content warning for bad racial caricature that is not okay. But you'll get scans from the original comics, you know, the black and white sketches that he black and white drawings that he submitted to the paper to be colorized, because he did not do his own coloring. He just suggested color. Interviews with his descendants, like everything. But this museum has a ton of great resources. So if you really want to see some cool stuff, they have a great collection too. High res scans too. So you're not reading it at full size, but you're at least able to zoom in.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I have to say, I also like the Brainstorm podcast that you're giving out to backers. And
I'm glad that people are listening to that.
And while I believe that the Kickstarter campaign is over, you can still pre-order on BackerKit, correct?
Yeah. And actually, so the updates make me think of one more tip. We got a lot of compliments on our updates during our Kickstarter. And I'd never honestly thought that they were as important as they were. I think with La Mancha, we were maybe doing every week or two. I have to go back and look, but it wasn't with Nemo, it was every day. And so if you ever do a Kickstarter, what I would advise, if you can, is to try to come up with some content that, and so this is actually one area that working with this property, a benefit that we had. We didn't have to come up with this content out of thin air. You know, you could conceivably have like every day, let's look at a piece of concept art, or every day, let's talk about a mechanic or something. But, and you don't have to do every day. We did, but I'll tell you why. We had an update every day, and we decided like Wednesdays are artwork Wednesdays. That's when we're going to talk about a piece of artwork we did, or our art style, or something. Tuesdays are our usual days for releasing a recording of our weekly meeting as a podcast, or like a 15-minute segment of it as a podcast. Friday it became like a level design day, kind of. Saturday was our dev stream, things like that. But the point is, we were engaging the audience. We were giving them meaningful looks behind the curtain. And our updates were not just like, hey, everybody, here's what percentage we're at. Please pledge. Like, we had a paragraph or two of that. But we actually got a lot of people saying, I don't ever read Kickstarter updates. I read yours. because I would do an article. We had one of the ones that we still do and that people love was one called Sunday Funnies, where it's just like, let me just nerd out about McKay. This is where I write my academic paper about McKay. And people loved it. So, you know, be engaged, but give them something to read, like entertain people through your updates if you ever do a Kickstarter. That was huge for us. So, you know, okay. I realize we're over your time. Thank you for staying.
Thank you so much for coming by and telling us so much. Yeah, we've had some successful Kickstarters at EGS before, and I hope that people will, you know, be ready to maybe do so again. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
You have a good night.
Nice to see you.
Fascinating.
Bye.